So without further ado, with a presentation on ICAO's regulatory role in API and PNR, I would like you to help me welcome Mr. Jitu Thaker.
So is this on? Yes. Well, good morning, folks. My personal welcome to you to Montreal and, of course, to ICAO. And if this is your first time here in the SkyTalks, welcome to SkyTalks. My name is Jitu Thaker, and I'm going to talk to you about ICAO's regulatory role in API and PNR. API and PNR, what are they? I'm going to very briefly go over these with you, and then and tell you why ICAO is interested in API and PNR. And then, of course, I will focus on the regulatory framework regarding API and PNR. What's API? This is the collection of passengers and or crew members' data, biographic data and flight details by the aircraft operator before departure of flight. For example, I make a booking to fly from here to, say, Amsterdam. The check-in generally opens about 48 hours before the flight, so I can go online and I can enter my data online. But if not, I go to the airport, and at the airport, at the check-in desk, I present my passport. This is my passport. I'm a South African, just for your information. And you see the check-in, at the check-in desk, the person there who takes the passport and scans the passport. And what is scanned is the machine readable zone, and that information is collected by the airline. And it is then transmitted electronically to the destination state. So what is contained in the machine readable zone? The travel document number, the issue date of the document that is in the machine readable zone, nationality, date of birth, etc. The flight information is part of the API, and that too is sent by the airline to the destination state. The airline code, flight number, departure date and time, and total number of passengers on the flight. What is a PNR? A PNR is a record that is kept by the airline to service its passengers. So when I make a booking, I, of course, give my credit card details, my name, my API information, the food I'd like to eat, vegetarian meal, or sometimes just to experience it, I ask for a vegan meal. So that information is stored by the airline. Seat. I always like the aisle seat, so I always try and pick an aisle seat. So all that information that is used to service the passenger is stored by the airline. And this information can be captured months or weeks or days in advance of the flight. If we go on holiday, I like to book my ticket at least 4 months before I fly. So incrementally, as we head towards the date that I'm going to fly, all this information is collected by the airlines. So this is what a typical PNR could look like: API details, other details of the passenger, the record locator, that's you always have that at the top of your ticket, and that tells the airline who you are. Contact information. It can also contain a frequent flyer number, free text that the airline enters in by hand to provide more information to perhaps the captain of the flight, giving more details about myself. like Mr. Thaker is an important person, so please make sure he gets a business class seat, you know, something like that, as an example. So, why is this important? This information is of interest to states, primarily because of border control, law enforcement, and other such purposes. So why would ICAO be interested in regulating these matters? And that goes back, though that is because of the Chicago Convention. There are several articles of the Chicago Convention that have a particular focus for facilitation. Some of them. Article 13 of the Convention requires all passengers and crew to comply with a state's immigration, customs, clearance, and entry requirements before the person enters the state and while the person and at departure from the state. Article 22. Under Article 22, all states have agreed that they will prevent unnecessary delays in the administration of immigration, customs, and clearance laws. Under Article 23, the states have agreed to undertake to establish procedures on customs and immigration and other matters that are agreed under the convention. Now, this, of course, this is just a summary. It paraphrases the articles of the convention, and there's more to it. So, if you're interested in the legal bits, I would request you to look at the convention articles. Now, moving on to the regulatory framework. In Annex 9, you will find the provisions, the standards and recommended practices that deal with API and PNR. And that is the main focus. It's in Annex 9. I will also allude to several other, I will also allude to the high-level conference on aviation security that was held in 2012 and the assembly resolutions, like you will be considering on Thursday. The resolutions are more of an encouraging type. They urge states to do things, but in Annex 9, states are obliged to comply with the provisions of Annex 9. And throughout the presentation, you will see a focus on standardization, and that is the theme of this presentation. That is the bottom line of the presentation, and that is the main focus over here. So please keep that in mind as we move throughout the presentation. Standardization, very important. Why is it important? I am sure you want to know, and I will tell you, but at the end of the presentation. So Annex 9 was developed to elaborate states' obligations under Articles 22, 23, 24 of the Convention, and to standardize procedures for meeting the legal requirements under several articles. Article 10, for example, landing at customs airport. You have seen Article 13. Article 14 deals with the prevention of the spread of disease. Article 29, the documents that are to be carried on an aircraft. Article 35 concerns cargo restrictions. So these are the articles that find their expression in Annex 9. There are 5 standards currently in Annex 9 that regulate API. They are all binding. They have a conditional binding force unless a state informs ICAO that they will not apply. I will focus on the first 3. They are the most important. Standard 348, 3481, and 3482. What does Standard 348 says? It says each contracting state that introduces API So currently API is not mandatory. So if your state introduces API, then it has to be done under national legislation. That is the first important point. If your state wants API, you have to have national legislation. The word shall indicates binding force. Recommended practices that are just guidance, they are not binding on states, they contain the word should. And this applies to all the annexes of the convention, shall and should. So if your state introduces API, you have to have national legislation that adheres to international recognized standards for the transmission of advanced passenger information. What are these international recognized standards? The explanation is given in the standard itself. You have 3 notes. The first note briefly describes API, and that's, you saw that earlier in the presentation, and it provides information on what is the PAX list message. The PAX list message is the international standard that has been adopted through the UN EDIFACT, the United Nations rules on the electronic, I keep on forgetting this. That's why, luckily, I have notes. So it stands for, yes, UN rules for electronic data interchange for administration, commerce, and transport. So these rules have been adopted by the UN, and within those rules, the PAX list message, that is a specialized set of structured data that has been developed to deal with passenger manifest transmissions. So that is the standard. And the third note informs states that the PAX list message does not apply to general aviation. Standard 3481 requires that if a state requires API, then only the biographical data that is available in machine-readable passports developed per document 9303, that's machine-readable travel documents. And you saw the elements that are found in the machine-readable zone. So this standard mandates that the state shall only ask for that information. And all the information has to conform to the specifications of the UN EDIFACT PAX list message that is found in the WCO, IATA, ICAO, API guidelines. These 3 organizations have been working together for years, for many years, in collaborating on API and PNR matters. They have developed API guidelines that provide more information on API and that contain the PAX list message. So anytime a state comes to ask and says, where can I find information, we direct them to the guidelines, and these are available on the ICAO and the WCO and IATA website, and they are sort of updated on a periodic basis. So these 3 organizations have agreed on a fixed set of API information, that biographic data and flight information that can be required for the PAX list message. But what if your state wants more information? To give you one example, at the API PNR meeting that we have at the World Customs Organization every year, at the meeting we had last year, one state said that it wanted to add an additional element dealing with the weight of baggage. And so the state made this request through what is known as the data maintenance request through the WCO, IATA, and ICAO meeting, the API PNR contact committee in Brussels. And we considered the request, and the meeting agreed that yes, this was a genuine, it was a good idea to have the weight of baggage included in the PAX list message, And now that has been forwarded to the government, to the UN body that is responsible for updating the UN Edifact message. So that is what Standard 3482 says, that if you cannot comply with the PAX list message, if you need more information, then this is the process that you shall follow. It is binding. Moving now on to interactive API. So I gave the example earlier that when I check in for my flight, the information is collected, and the information of all the passengers on that flight is collected and sent in one message, in a batch message to the destination country. Interactive API is interactive. It's more forward-looking. And what happens here is that I go to the check-in counter, my passport is scanned, and my information is sent immediately to the destination country. And the airline queries, do we let this person board? And almost immediately, the destination country will send a message. Yes, we know Mr. Thaker, that we have no problems, please let him board. And I get a boarding card. So then I get onto the plane. But if in the database that the destination country has, there's some problem, there's some issue, maybe I have done something and I have landed up on the watch list, so they don't want me to go to the States. So they will tell the airline, they will send a message, no board, do not let this person board. And I will not get a boarding card. And that is what is interactive API. Annex 9 contains recommended practices on interactive API. They are not binding. 348.8 says that if your state seeks to implement IPI, then you should conform to the guidelines. And if you do, oh, my apologies. Yeah, so that is interactive API. Moving now on to PNR. Annex 9 contains recommended practices on PNR. They are not binding. What recommended practice 3.49 says that if your state requires PNR access, then you should align your data requirements and your handling of such data with the guidelines contained in ICAO document 9944. In 2006, ICAO published guidelines for the benefit of states who want PNR information. And the recommended practice also says that your request should also be aligned with the PNR Gov message implementation guidance that is published by the WCO and endorsed by ICAO and IATA. The PNR Gov message has been developed by IATA, but it has been endorsed by the three organizations developing an international procedure for PNR. (349.2) goes a bit ahead and says that when states require PNR data, then they should consider the adoption and implementation of the PNR Gov message as a method of transferal of PNR data. The ICAO guidelines that you find in Doc 9944, I will not go into this in great detail now, but the guidelines, they address a range of issues. The meaning of PNR, why states want access. API identifies individuals that are on a watch list. PNR is used for risk assessment. PNR identifies or looks for patterns of travel. And that is why states want a PNR as well as API for border control purposes, but their functions are a bit different. The guidelines contain a maximum number of data elements that may be required by a state. It is not that a state would want all the 9 data elements. So a state can pick and choose the elements it wants. The guidelines talk about filtering and storage of PNR data. Very importantly, the guidelines address data protection and the security and integrity of data, because you could have very sensitive information in a PNR, the type of food that a person may want to eat, medical conditions of a person. If a person with a disability, for example, is traveling, that will be contained in a PNR, because that is the information that an airline uses to service the passenger. So it has to know if the person has any health conditions. Now all this is considered sensitive data, and that is why the guidelines go into detail and talk about the security and integrity of data. The guidelines say what a PNR should not contain. A PNR should not contain, for example, the marital status of a passenger, should not contain the political views of a passenger, should not contain information on the sexual orientation of a passenger, because that information is not needed for the airline to service the passenger. So that these details should not be contained in a PNR. The guidelines go into addressing laws and regulations of states, the methods of PNR data transfer. There are currently 2 methods. One is the pull method, in which the state goes into the computer systems of the airline and pulls the data it requires. The other method, and that is the method that the guidelines prefer, is the push method. Under the push method, the airline sends the information to the government. The data is pushed. And why? This information belongs to the airline. And also, it can control the information that can be sent to the destination state. The API guidelines and the PNR reporting standards, they are free, and they are available on the ICAO website, and you could find them at that web page. Now, I mentioned earlier that we had a high-level conference on aviation security in 2012. API and PNR were on the agenda because ICAO thought that this was a very important matter, and it was discussed under the rubric of aviation security. Standardization. Remember, I said at the beginning, standardization. So this message was emphasized again, that states should develop international standards, that there should be a single agency to receive that information. And ICAO should provide states with assistance and training. The conference also recommended that states should adopt interactive API for enhanced aviation security, prevent illegal migration, etc. You will be considering assembly resolutions, and they address in detail passenger data exchange systems. Earlier this year, the Facilitation Panel, that is the panel that makes amendments to Annex 9, it came up with additional provisions to enhance the existing API standards. I will not go into detail now, I'm running out of time. But you can find all this on the website, and it's a summary of the recommendations in one of the assembly working papers. Key recommendations. The Facilitation Panel has recommended that a standard be introduced on API, obliging each state to require API information, and that is a direct result of the Security Council resolution that was passed in 2014. This will be considered by the Air Transport Committee October, and by the Council in March of next year. Now, to go back, why standardization? It's important for the airline. Now, if you do not have standardization, You could have the airline sending the same information to different agencies. That is expensive for the airline, that is expensive for the agencies. But if you have standardized API and PNR, the airline would send the same information to what is known as one agency, who will act as the single window. And then this information can be disseminated to as many agencies as the state wants. It saves the airline money, it saves the government money, because you only need one system. Under this system here, you will need 3 or 4, 5 different systems. That is expensive for the government. In this, you just need one. So it is less expensive for both the airline and the state, and very importantly, it's more efficient. So standardization and efficiency. So these are the 2 messages I want you to take away from this. My email address is there, so please, at any time, please feel free to send an email to ask for information. We have tons of information to give you, so please do not hesitate. Thank you.